what happens to me in my job as a coach.
A lot of people were dependent on the system to just keep them going forward. So there actually wasn't any learning. I would argue to say that we're moving further and further away from the concept of autonomy.
The coach needs to be a helper. The coach needs to be a guide. James, how you doing, man?
I'm great, thank you.
James, today, man, I want to talk about autonomy. But the intent today is to set the foundation and groundwork. We'll be having these conversations every week. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be, ingrained in some of these principles that we're going to talk about specifically over the first 2 weeks. So I just want to get a really, really clear understanding of some of these words that we're going to be using as we move forward with the show. So the very first one I wanted to dig in to this word autonomy and what it means for, we'll talk about fitness, obviously, because we always do, but we need to extend it beyond fitness. So I want to talk about our autonomy and what it means there. And you've been using this word for quite some time as it relates to fitness, but very specifically in my brain, James, I remember this might have been 2019 or 2020. You said the whole point is to lead a client to autonomy capable of navigating fitness without you, and called that the true definition of autonomy. I don't know if you remember those exact words and how you said that, but I want to know, what did you mean by that? Do you still mean the same thing now as what you meant then? And how does this oppose what you see happening or what you've seen happen in fitness over the past, I don't know, dude, 40 years or whatever the case is? Hold on to those, right, for 1 second. What I want to do before you dive into that is I want to talk about what does autonomy actually mean and where does it come from, okay? So autonomy is self-governance, okay? To live by your own law, okay? So let's go back to the Greek because the Greeks were really good at vocabulary, right? So autonomy in the Greek means self-law specifically, so autos nomos. So I'm going to leave this up as you go through your definition of autonomy, and then I'll bring it full circle after you roll through those few questions I had for you, James.
Well, as you were starting, I was, probably incorrectly thinking, well, where did this kind of bubble up? I don't want to only begin it when you said you heard it first for me in that context, because I think the start of COVID was definitely like a supercharged moment to discuss that particular word of autonomy. But I think it was more so in my, as to where it came up so I could try to define it for myself. It wasn't, it's a word that's been used in so many different ways, but that's reflected in how I learned about it in my move to America. Because in 2011, coming to America, it was, largely what was on top of mind was to build this business, and to build a number of ideas that I had in mind. I still have the paperwork, that Leanne and I kind of wrote together, and I would write on my own as to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to see things. And I think it was that process of seeping into America and grounding myself in Arizona and grounding myself in the people and just really, the way I do, it's just a personal characteristic of mine. When I want to know about something, I really dig in to know about it, right? Like, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be very wise on the topic, but I just want to know more about it, and that comes from previous issues in my life, always wanting to be right. But I learned how to use that power over time to just find things out so I could understand. Anyways, it was in the original documents from our founding fathers, which is apropos for this 250-year celebration that's coming up. But it was in my historical reading of this country and the building of the country, and in the language and the words, there was always this thing that really sat well with me. And it wasn't in reflection to Canada. It was just in reflection to what I saw happening in my own development as an American. And that was largely around those words of being an autonomous, self-moving, self-governing body. And that body could be an individual person, a local community, a state, etc. And it just, so that like bubbled up this whole, idea around, where does this involve for myself, right? Myself as a human, James Fitzgerald in America. And then of course it's going to seep into like, well, what does that mean inside a business? And what does that mean to be a true free mover, right? And a true free thinker. And so that's where it kind of, came, just to back up and say, that's where it came to be for me, was that. And then I guess, I don't know, there wasn't like a striking moment, but Carl, like, we certainly tried a lot of things in fitness, and we had a lot of conversation, right? And I taught a lot of coaches, and I said a lot of things. Now, with that though, you kind of stress the system, which means that when you just keep saying things and you're trying to be progressive and keep moving forward and trying to get better and trying to get better and trying to get better, you stress the whole system enough where you land on these truths. You land on these really hard principles that have already been built for many years in fitness, right? That you both you and I know that were there, but we had to really test the system, right? To be like, is that really a truth seeking kind of idea for fitness? And what I mean by that was that it's when we did all those teachings and all those classes and all that conversation, when you get really, like the late nights with whiskey and cigars and you're like digging really hard, which never happened, but you get my point. You start talking about things like, well, what's the end result? What is the end result for a client? Like, why be involved whatsoever? Right? Why be in the system? Why do what you're doing? Right? So bubbling up all these things on like, what's the purpose of a coach? What's the meaning of a coach? Like, what do I get out of it? Am I just doing it for pleasure? Am I just doing it to be smart? Am I just doing it to for other reasons, etc.? And so that's where it kind of like in the mid 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, we kind of challenge that notion of like, what's the end result? And then of course we landed on a number of things, autonomy being one of them as that global language. But we talked about things, the hard truths around what is graduation, right? What does it mean for a client to get to the end, the stressed system, right, of learning, right? So we would say, well, is the client's goal to acquire knowledge? And everyone in the room be like, yeah. Okay, well, how much knowledge is there to acquire? And what is this knowledge, right? You see that? And then when you start down that road, you start recognizing, which is an unfortunate dark corner of fitness, is that a lot of people weren't necessarily learning. A lot of people were dependent on the system to just keep them going forward. So there actually wasn't any learning.
Maybe recency bias, right? Like when you have something on your head, you talk about it more and you wrestle with it more with people that are outside of your inner circle. So because I knew that we were talking about this today, I went a little bit deeper on this concept and conversation with a group of coaches in an office hours conversation today. And what I noticed, kind of being in the background and like, quote unquote, in the room when you would talk about these things, let's just call it 5 years ago. The faces were kind of perplexed. Like the faces that were in the room at the time were trying to understand exactly what you were saying and what you were getting at. And there was a lot of, whether it was said or not, James, it was like, well, what happens to me in my job as a coach? That's something that I noticed. And I think that you noticed that too during those conversations, even after 2017. The past few times that I've talked about this with and without using the term autonomy, right? Because we'll get into a couple demarcations here in a second. But what I noticed today specifically in the last few times is there was a lot of shaking of the heads because it made sense. You know what I'm saying, James? Like, I think what people want to hear is what makes sense to them, and when you start talking about at a very simple level, hey, James, do you think that it's good that when you start working with Sally, that one day when you are not working with Sally, Sally learned some things from you and she can go off and do those things on her own without hiring the next James? You'd probably be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when it's explained in that way, and I know that's such a dumbed down version of this concept and idea, but when it's explained that way, I don't think that anyone can, with honesty, say, no, I think that that's a bad idea. So when you say like I think we're moving further away from the concept, just as culture, I think you're saying that more so. What do you mean by that? Like, do you think that people don't think it makes sense when that idea and that thought is laid out to them, or do you think that in the industry, outside of the industry, people are just pushing so much against the concept that we're so far away from it? I just want to understand what you meant when you said that we're
Yeah.
far away from it.
Yeah. Well, talk is cheap, right? And it's the same thing I heard the whole time, though. It always made sense, right? But no one had the guts to like, put the actions in place.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it's anything different. It's just more people that were in the room nodding their head, but they're just nodding their head. You know what I'm saying? So, it takes a lot of guts, right? And it takes a lot of work. And arguably, I would say in the current system, it's actually more difficult, right? It's more difficult to have a vision of that idea, of this graduation protocol, because in the end, you're going to have to deal with all your clients who are going to need like a whole bunch of mental reengineering, right? Because they love sucking from the teat, right? They can't, so many high percentages of them just need that. They cannot, because they have like 30 other examples in their life, right? It's like, oh, but I got to have this and I got to have that. I got to have that. And you're the coach being like, you don't need to have that. Who told you need that? And they're like, you're crazy, dude. So actions dictate it, right? And so what are your actions, right? And I gave kudos to those coaches who would stay in touch with me, and they would, because they fulfilled those, right? They would email at the time and say like, here's a picture of this lady. She's doing her own stuff, right? She's teaching her kids and her family. That happens, right? It does happen. It actually can happen. So, but I didn't see those head nodders like putting actions into place, and for good reason, right? As you know, which you definitely know, the system will not allow it, right? Everything around them will not allow it. Their peers won't allow it. Their educational system won't allow it. Their business won't allow it. The community won't allow it. The culture sure as will not allow it, right? Because it's the whole thing is based upon that. But anyways, this is always thing that I try to like turn coaches to try to think about it, is that it's just right there. Like it's like it's that easy. You just got to reach out and grab it. It's right there. So why not just take it?
I think it's interesting when you start to think about, well, what does it actually mean, right? What does it mean to live that out, to play it out? I don't think it's that complicated. I think that it's pretty simple. I think all it means, James, you tell me if you disagree with this, is expectations and context is set on the front end of what this relationship looks like.
Now we're talking about plans, right? We're talking about actions. Like, what does it mean? 18-month contract, in the business. And after that, there's actually laws that say you can't go longer than 18. You know what I'm saying? Like you gotta lock that in, right? It's like now you're talking about actions, right?
Yeah.
And for some people, they only need like 2 weeks, right? See, that's the thing, is like, because remember, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a knowledge, right? The knowledge of the concept. Because if you seep that knowledge of the concept into someone's mind, who are you to think that all these people need 18 months, right? That's the thing, is like, no, all they need is like peace. They just need to like sit back and go, interesting, these patterns, challenging aerobic stuff. Wow. I'll just do that tomorrow, like they're not wrapping themselves around all the complexities that you were saying.
Yeah, it's funny that the business case actually falls apart as well, James. Like the excuse that it's not good for the business falls apart. I ran a model for this where it was like, hey, let's look at, average LTV for a client that works with an individual design coach. What does that look like? How much money is this client paying this coach over time based on how long they're working with them for? And average LTV sits around 13 or 14 months on average, right? There's obviously coaches that have clients for 6 years, and there's coaches that have clients for 2 weeks and they quit. But on average, it was about 13 months, right? You do the math, and there are examples of the individual that does need 2 weeks, but there's also examples of the individual that just needs to like obey and do it for a long time to feel like they have the ability to go off and do it on their own. So let's say that is 18 months. The
Mhm.
business case that I put out is, hey, imagine let's live in fantasy land, right? I'm working with a bunch of coaches, and I have a bunch of coaches in front of me, and I say, how would you feel about this? Would you sign this contract that would say that every client that you acquire, they will all be with you for a minimum of 18 months? Every coach in that room better shake their head yes, based on the law of the numbers and what's actually out there. It's like 13 months is the average. So 18 months is solid. If we're like, hey, we think that we can teach people how to fish in 18 months, across the board, and patterns and pacing and lifestyle and movement and blah, 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 right? It's like reverse engineer for that 18 months, sign them up for 18 months, and that client is locked in contractually for 18 months on this autonomy program. We good with that? And it's like coaches are going to be like, yeah, I would love to lock in my clients at a guaranteed rate of 18 months, right? So it's like, the business case actually falls apart, because if your aim is autonomy, and we think it's somewhere around that 18 months on average, and you're signing up your clients for an 18-month contract, not a 6-month, not a 9-month, and not a 12-month, from a business standpoint, you're actually going to end up on the positive end of this thing. And from a fulfillment standpoint, you're actually making an impact in people's lives, because when they leave at that 13 months, what are most of those clients doing? They're not like saying like, man, I'm just so glad that I worked with Joe, and now I can go off and do this in my garage and teach my neighbors and teach my kids and teach my wife. And so it's like, no, they're going to go off to the next thing, right? Like, Joe didn't work for me. Maybe F45 will work for me. Or Joe didn't work for me. Maybe Jenny will work for me, right? So it's like, I think from a business standpoint, it actually makes a heck of a lot of sense. Maybe we'll go through that in a different episode, but I think that crumbles and falls apart really quickly when coaches are like, this is not good for my business. This is like the theme of the conversation today, right? But before I jumped on this call with you,
Okay, cool.
with a group of coaches, it was this whole concept of like, why do we feel like everything needs to be so complex and complicated? What is it in us that feels that way? What is it? Not you and I, James. When I say us, I mean like
Yeah.
the real people in the real world living real lives, thinking that optimization is the aim, not just doing, not just living, right?
Yeah.
Again, maybe a much more lengthy conversation around like why simplicity is super beneficial and what we should aim for. But
Yeah. That
going back, one more thing, going back to, we talked about this a little bit when we were in Utah, but going back to, these coaches have to understand what their clients are hearing. They have to understand what they're listening to, what
yeah.
culture is telling them, right? Culture is actually telling these clients that lifestyle and behavior and simplicity wins, but they're wrapping it around a bunch of complexity, a bunch of pharmaceuticals, a bunch of optimizing protocols, a bunch of that stuff, right? So it's actually being packaged as kind of what we're talking about, but it's not being delivered as that. It's being delivered as what it's always been delivered as, what you've always called the rehabilitation model. It's just packaged a little bit differently right now.
Yeah. 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 And it takes one to know one, right? Because I was part and parcel created the complex model, right? I was a part of that. With good intentions, right? I never had intentions of people, creating an entire fitness universe of dependent coaches, um, which then, created dependency on clients. But I also sold, an idea, and I sold a bunch of things too, thinking that of that ideal. So when I say those things, it's not that. So I was the seller, right? So I know that position. I know both sides, and I just had to say that out loud so that people don't think I'm like shirking away from never having a part to play. No,
Yeah.
I listen, I remember I started in the 90s when, this is on the back end of accreditations, because when accreditations began from the university in the 70s, that built this whole idea of, everyone needs a fitness coach, right? No one paused at that point to be like, but why can't people just do leisure activities we've been doing all this time? Right? It was like, oh, no, wait now. That's my job, right? And so I'm going to make everyone believe the knowledge I gain from this big institution and university is really important. And
Yeah.
no one else gets to touch it unless I tell you exactly how you do. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's just a power grab of knowledge that I started with in the late 90s that I was taught. I'm not going to blame them, but I was taught by others that you got to be smart, you got to be ahead of the game, you got to be doing the most fancy things. What does that sound like? That sounds like fitness in 2026, right? So you gotta know that you're a part of it too. And I just wanted to say my point on that, so I don't sound like I'm shirking responsibility of it.
I've struggled with this word autonomy
Mm,
for a number of years. Like, really, I know we just laid out the definition. The definition is really clear, but everything has a cultural relevance to it, right? Even words in our language have cultural relevance to it as well. There's also this concept, or maybe this perspective of like, maybe this concept of autonomy, or let's keep saying using this term freedom. Maybe it's
yeah.
it's not. Um, Maybe it's not like, well, no one can tell me what to do, but rather it's, I want to be able to do the things that I could not do before. So when I start to think about physical autonomy and physical freedom, and this will be like our, leeway into next week, because I want to talk about physical freedom next week. There's two ways to look at it, right? I am capable of doing the things that I ought to be able to do. Okay. And then there's, I'm knowledgeable enough to have autonomy to implement those things in whatever my daily movement practice might be. So there's a couple, and I know those two things are different things, but they're in the same plane in my estimation, right? It's like, think about someone that does not have the physical freedom to walk down the street or to sit on their toilet, right? Like, you know what I'm saying there, James? Like, there's two concepts of autonomy, like the want and then the capability piece as well. So I do think that as like I don't know, as an aim for every human is, I believe every human should have physical freedom and autonomy in their capabilities to be able to do the things that they want to do from a physical standpoint.
Okay, I got you there. I would argue that it's innately inside people, so they don't need to gain knowledge to become autonomous. Remember, the system was created by us, right?
Mhm.
We created dependent humans on the coach, right? So again, that's like, so the autonomy conversation that you have with head nodding coaches today, it's just a part of the story. It's like
Yeah.
chapter 24 out of chapter 25 of the 25 chapters of fitness that, in my personal opinion, kind of died in 2020.
You're in Idaho right now. Your neighbor comes to you and they say, "Hey, James, I do not have the capability to do the things that I want to do. Can you help me? Can you give me some advice? Can you teach me the things that I need to do to be able to walk to the end of the block and back?" Right? Or maybe even more practical. I need you to help me be able to improve my ability to sit on my couch and stand back up without assistance, because I feel like right now at my age this is really important and something I need to be able to do. So this has nothing to do with knowledge, right? It's like they have physical incapabilities, so they don't have autonomy. And I'm using the term autonomy or physical freedom in a different way than we've used in the rest of this conversation. I mean it from a capability standpoint. I need to actually train my physical body to be able to do something that I can't do right now.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult because you may be able to come up with like just so many cases of that, but you know, I just don't even think that that question needs to be answered. Like the fact that they're asking the question is they'll have to go somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, because I just see it as like a hook, and maybe it's the same thing that you have with seeing the people on the other side of the fence with taking their liberties to the highest extent. I just see it as it's a rehab hook, right? It's a dependency hook.
Yep.
It's just like, the person is asking a question of like, because I think that in most cases, I could be wrong on that, but I have had experience of this, right? Where people say that to me, but it's because they don't want to take responsibility, right? That sounds, and then, that sounds really harsh depending upon how many stories of hard luck people have had. But I'm not afraid to talk about what the have you been doing that you can't get up off your toilet. No, honestly, right? Like
Yeah.
that's an honest question that needs to go back over the court, right? Like, I'm not the one who's going to provide you with that answer. Maybe you should take a deep look as to how you got into your position, right? And that's what I'm saying. It's innate in people to come up with those solutions to those problems. And it doesn't require this constructed universe, right, of dependency on another human, of this complex knowledge to get down the street.
You said something about when you had all the people in the room in 2012 and you were talking about this concept of autonomy, it brought up the question of, well, what is the meaning of or the purpose of a coach, having a coach? What is that? I think that if we can answer that really well, that would actually answer that question of like, why is this person asking that question to me, right? Like, who am I? Right?
Yeah.
Because I think if we could define, what is the meaning of the coach needs to be a helper. The coach needs to be a guide, right? And that, like, those are simple terms, but a lot comes along with those terms. And those terms are so much different than any other terms that I could have chosen to write down, because now I'll have to defend, well, what do I mean by that? Why a helper? What does that convey? Right? Well, that conveys that there's like I'm going to use an old word that you used to use a lot. There is dancing that occurs between a helper and a client. In a perfect world, quote unquote, maybe the coach could say, client, you do this, you obey me, and then you come back when you're done doing that thing. But that's fantasy land. That's not going to happen, right? In a lot of situations. We don't have to dig into that, but I do want to hit that later on, like, the meaning and the definition of a coach, and not even just a fitness coach, man, like just a coach, right? Like, what does it mean to be a coach? What does it mean to coach your children? What does it mean to coach someone through something really challenging that they're going through? And you have maybe some past experiences, and maybe you're able to give them a little bit of wisdom through those experiences that you had.
I always enjoyed the challenge of what it proposed. I always, felt the negative but inspiring energy in the room to coaches, with coaches when we kind of bring these challenging things up. And of course, like you said, they would always, just take time to think about it and then be like, oh yeah, there's lots of people that I could help, because that was ironically back when we started life coaching as a part of the educational process. That was something that Bernie Nowakowski introduced, was an aspect of the afternoon on the second day to get coaches to realize, what is the best helper? I don't know if you remember what that was, but you'd have to organize things to determine what a best helper is. And then you would pull out all those principles that makes you a really good helper. And then coaches would realize at the end, aha, you tricked us. That's exactly what a coach is someone just helping that movement forward. So, but finally on it, I think if anything, if we're speaking to coaches and if coaches are listening out there, and I do appreciate if you do listen, I really do appreciate that, is that just be okay with the fact that you are inside the system, because some may feel they may feel something negative around that, because sometimes it's difficult to realize you're in a really, like we've discussed numerous times, fitness is really downstream from culture now, like significantly downstream from culture. So, but keep fighting the good fight, right? Keep listening to challenging ideas like this, and it is worthwhile. it is worthwhile to realize that you are fighting a significant uphill battle and that you may not win in the end. Um, and you and I are just so grateful to be able to discuss the end results as concepts of that, right? What is the end result concept of like the winning of a relationship between a coach and a client? And I think it is that human kind of walks off into the sunset, right? Really vital, and is their head is full of these concepts as to how they're going to take care of themselves and their family for the rest of their life.
There is no answer to this. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is a right brain conversation. We're wrestling with an idea that is unbelievably complex, and it gets even more complex when you add more people into the equation. But I think that these are super useful conversations, not only to listen to, but if you're a coach or anyone listening to this conversation, like, be a part of the conversation. Like, what do you think? Right? Like, what are your thoughts? Wrestle with these ideas. I think that's where a lot of the benefit really comes from with these deeper, more like, this isn't a tactical conversation. This is a theoretical, philosophical conversation that you just need to sit with, right? And sitting with this conversation and actually thinking through this is going to create clarity, if not in this aspect of the conversation that we're talking about around autonomy, around other things, right? Like, we talked about a lot of things, James, that probably need qualification, right? Like, well, what does freedom mean, right? Like, we could have went off on a tangent there and like just went another 2 hours on, well, what does that word mean, But that's why I really am looking forward to continuing having these conversations with you, James, because you do it better than anyone I know. You stretch my brain, and I'm going to go away thinking through some of my conceptions or preconceptions of what I think this means, and what I think this means for myself, coaches that we work with, so on and so forth. So this is a nice refining conversation, so I appreciate it. And then I just have to say to N, I love your shirt, love the new OPEX icon. What does that one say on the back? Is that the black on black individual design? Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, no, I think it's good for coaches to leave with a couple of things that they could work on themselves as kind of homework. Sit with it and say, well, how do I feel when this concept comes up? And say, how do I feel about this for myself? Right? And realize some of the things that you may have to work on yourself with regards to what that means. And then, jump into the coaching role and say, well, how does that mean for me and my business? And I think they could also struggle as a secondary thing. They could do some homework to struggle with defining, the kind of feelings that come up and realizing those feelings when you and I had that discussion on, the freedoms and liberties conversation, right? Because that's a good one, because that moves into the political, right? That moves into society, right? And you start seeing things like, oh, interesting, handouts, bootstrapping, right? These are the words that are used in the, and you should enter into those thoughts, right? Don't go online and just, start start nailing on something, but just like sit down and think about that. Like, yeah, where do I sit on those thoughts, right? And do those principles bleed out into all these other things? And then lastly, on our final point there, visualize that you are a part of a process, and be grateful that you have the opportunity to like think about these challenging ideas, but don't get emotional. Just be a realist around it, and just know you're in an uphill battle, but we got your back, because we're going to continue to discuss some of those challenging things. So there's some pieces of homework for people to go away with.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks, James. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.
Okay, brother.